I had a decent amount of knowledge about SF5 and fighting games in general prior to my experiment. If you're newer to this game or the genre as a whole, it's going to take a while to absorb everything. How quickly you progress will depend on what you already know. In Part 3, I went over how to form a basic game plan. In Part 4, we need to talk about the other big elephant in the room, how to execute on it. In Street Fighter V, a couple of rules of thumb should help. First, let's go over the neutral game, i.e., time when both players are on relatively even footing, vying for control. This is often referred to for Street Fighter purposes as footsies, defined at sonichurricane.com as the mid-range ground-based aspect of fighting game strategy. It's a situation where no player is at an advantage. During the neutral game, my strategy was pretty simple. Stand at a range where my anti-air works, while also being able to play the ground game, i.e. my stand heavy punch game. I'd also react to fireballs with crouch medium punch. Later on, I made some additions, adding crouch heavy kick as a move to throw out sparingly when my opponent's pressing lots of buttons at kind of a mid-range spacing, and then this was also the range where I can dash in and then go for a throw or a crouch light punch to pressure. In general, I'll try to poke with something like stand heavy punch either when I think my opponent is a moment away from pressing a button so I can catch them before their move comes out, or I'll try to bait my opponent into whiffing a move, and during that tiny window of time where they're recovering from doing their move and they aren't free to act, I'll try to hit them. In Street Fighter V, there are also plenty of non-neutral situations where it's temporarily one player's turn to act. Some of these are really obvious, like after someone is knocked down, their opponent might get to force them to block something as they wake up. In Street Fighter V, you can see a visual representation of whose turn it is in training mode by turning on these options. When one character commits to a move, they'll turn red until that move completes, indicating they're not free to act. In the attack data area, Ryu's commitment to the move is shown as a bar that will empty until he is free to act again. This recovery is also shown numerically as number of frames, or 60th of a second, so a quick estimate would be Ryu's committed to this for about 2/3 of a second, which is a pretty long time in fighting game terms. Resuming the video, you can see the bar decrease and the number decrease until Ryu is free to act again. This lets you see what we were going over earlier, trying to hit them when they're committed to a move. If Ryu misses his forward heavy punch and you're close enough, you can hit him before he recovers. When both characters are doing something, whoever will recover first is highlighted in blue, while the character taking longer to recover will be red. This is an easy way to check whose turn it is. If you block a sweep or an uppercut or something like that, you recover so much sooner that you can hit your opponent for free, like we talked about in Part 3. But there are plenty of other less obvious situations where it's one or the other player's turns, and recognizing these situations will round out your game plan and in general make everything feel a lot more deliberate and a lot less random. If you hit someone, i.e. if they don't block your attack, it's generally still your turn, so you can keep pressing buttons as you can act a split second before them. The flip side is, if you just got hit, it's not a great idea to be pressing buttons. It's not in the Chun game plan yet, but her stand medium kick would fit the bill. If you hit the opponent, you can act 2 frames, or 2/60ths of a second before your opponent, which means if both you and your opponent try to attack as quickly as possible after it hits, Chun can act sooner and therefore is more likely to win the following exchange. There are a whole host of factors which influence who is going to win out if both players decide to press a button at that next possible moment. But whoever can act sooner is in a better situation. On block, most long-range attacks or pokes leave the attacker at a very slight disadvantage, which means you might not want to press a button right away as the defender could challenge with their own. Let's stick with Chun's stand medium kick as our example. We talked a moment ago how if you hit them with this move, you can keep pressing buttons. On the flip side, if they block it, the opponent can actually act 2 frames before Chun can. Short-ranged attacks often leave the attacker at a slight advantage on block, and they're even better on hit. It's still the attacker's turn after they're blocked, so the defender should be wary of pressing a button afterwards. This is balanced out by their range, as if you block 1 or 2 of these, the attacker will have pushed themselves out of range to keep hitting you with these kinds of buttons. Examples in our plan would be Chun's crouch light punch or back heavy punch. For short-ranged attacks, these things taken together mean that if you're blocking, the attacker will eventually push themselves to a range where their only moves that'll reach you are those long-range pokes we talked about earlier. The ones that when blocked leave the attacker at a slight disadvantage. After doing that attack, their offensive pressure effectively ends. Prolonged offense happens if the attacker takes risks. Perhaps most commonly, they would have to walk or dash forward to get back in range of their advantageous buttons or threaten with a throw. Players can and do sneak in that forward movement to extend their pressure. If you can react to it or predict it, this is when you would press a button as the defender to stop that. As the attacker, you can do that same thing, i.e. use forward movement to keep your pressure going. But just like how it's important to be careful and wait to see if somebody is going to jump around or throw out punishable moves constantly, you should be careful about trying to immediately sneak in walking or dashing to prolong your offense. If, during your safe attack strings, your opponent is randomly getting hit, they're probably pressing buttons. If this is the case, just do those safe strings until they stop or until you win. Internalizing the timing for when to press buttons could take some time. It's important to recognize whether or not you're in a neutral situation, and if you're not, consider whose turn it is and act accordingly. Next up is the big question. What does this process look like with a character who isn't Chun-Li? Thanks as always to everybody who stuck with the series. If you'd like to find out more or support me, here's how you can do that. Thanks for watching.